My reunion with my ex-boyfriend of 3 years happened during a high-profile SWAT raid. He was the youngest, most promising detective captain in the department. I was a serial killer fleeing across state lines. The moment our eyes met, Ethan Carter froze. "Chloe, how is it you?" I seized the second of his distraction, spun around, and tried to sprint for the window. But one of his deputies fired. A bullet tore through my calf, and I collapsed onto the cold floor. In the interrogation room, Ethan's eyes were bloodshot. He slammed his fists on the table, roaring at me. "For lives, Chloe. For human beings. How could you do this? Tell me it's a mistake. Tell me. Please just say it." Looking at the agonizing pain in his eyes, I suddenly laughed. "You're right. It is a mistake. It's not 4. I leaned forward, my voice a chilling whisper. "It's 5. You care so much about your wife, my former best friend Lily Harrison, don't you? How have you not noticed that she's been missing?" Ethan's face turned deathly pale in an instant. His hands shook violently as he pulled out his phone. The lock screen, which used to be a picture of me, had been replaced by his wedding photo with Lily. He pressed the call button. A second later, a sweet, upbeat ringtone echoed from my jacket pocket. With a mocking smile, I slid out Lily's bloodstained phone and answered the call. "Hey, darling. Why didn't you come to save me? I'm so scared." Ethan lunged across the table, grabbing my collar with terrifying force. "What did you do to Lily?" Just as I was about to suffocate, the deputy captain rushed in and pulled him off me. "Captain, calm down. This is a public transparency live stream." Ethan gritted his teeth, his chest heaving. "Where is Lily?" I held up my hands. My handcuffs rattled loudly. "I don't know. Since you were smart enough to catch me, I'm sure you're smart enough to find her. Chloe Miller." Ethan's eyes were so red they looked ready to bleed. "Lily treated you like her own sister. When you were bullied in high school, she was the one who stood up for you. When your mother was dying in the hospital, Lily was the one who pulled strings to get her into the private ICU. She took care of her every single day, doing more than you ever did. She even emptied her own savings account to pay for your mom's chemotherapy when you couldn't afford it. Is this how you repay her?" On the large screen broadcasting the live feed, the comment section was exploding. "Wait, is she talking about Dr. Lily from Lincoln General Hospital? I know her. She's literally an angel. My dad was broke when he was sick, and Dr. Lily quietly paid for his meds out of her own pocket. Good people always die young. This sick murderer needs to fry in the electric chair." Facing the digital onslaught of accusations, I let out a cold laugh and turned my head away, refusing to look. My indifference pushed Ethan over the edge. He ripped a silver crucifix pendant off Lily's phone and slammed it onto the table in front of me. 3 years ago, just because Lily talked to me a few times to discuss your mother's treatment, you got paranoid. You accused her of trying to steal me, and you stabbed her in the stomach with a knife. I had to lock you up, but Lily was too kind-hearted. She signed a waiver to drop the charges so you wouldn't go to prison. And what did you do? You ran away, vanished without a trace, leaving her worried sick. She bought this crucifix for you. She prayed for your safety every single day. And you repaid her by murdering 4 people, and now her?" Ethan's voice cracked with pure hatred. "Do you have any idea that while you were in custody, your mother passed away? Lily dragged her injured body, fresh from surgery, to try and save your mother. She stood at the operating table for 12 hours straight without a single drop of water. When your mother didn't make it, Lily collapsed crying, and she paid for the entire funeral out of her own pocket. She blamed herself. She took time off work every single year on the anniversary of your mother's death to visit her grave. She did everything for you, Chloe, and you slaughtered her." At the mention of my mother, my eyes finally welled up with uncontrollable tears. Seeing my emotional crack, Ethan relaxed his fists. The hand that had once knelt before me to slip a promise ring onto my finger, now gently touched my shoulder. "Chloe, where did you hide Lily? If you show remorse and cooperate, I can talk to the DA. I can get you a plea deal." I looked up at him, my tears turning into a bitter, mocking laugh. "A plea deal? Ethan, you are a cheating piece of trash. Who gave you the right to offer me mercy?" Ethan's face turned bright red with embarrassment and anger. The deputy captain, who had been taking notes, couldn't hold back anymore. He stood up and yelled, "That's complete bullshit. After you stabbed Dr. Lily, Captain Carter felt so guilty that he only took care of her out of obligation. He was terrified she would sue you and ruin your life. After you vanished, Captain Carter used all his vacation days just to look for you across the country. Even when Dr. Lily came to the station, it was only to share leads about where you might be. You were gone for 3 years. Captain Carter's father was on his deathbed, and his last wish was to see his son get married. Dr. Lily felt sorry for the old man, so she suggested a fake wedding just to make a dying man happy." Ethan let out a long sigh and turned his back to me. The deputy captain pointed a shaking finger at my face. "Because we couldn't find you, and Dr. Lily was single. We all begged Captain Carter to just legally register the marriage to give her some security. She sacrificed her reputation for him. And now you frame him as a cheater? Chloe, you are utterly delusional. Ethan turned around, his face a portrait of profound grief. Chloe, do you want to know the real reason why Lily and I had that wedding? He walked over and threw a diamond ring onto the table. Lily said you hated her because of a misunderstanding. She wanted to use the wedding to lure you out so we could explain everything to you. Every single detail of that wedding was designed based on your favorite things. The dress you always wanted, the ring you picked out. They were all waiting in the dressing room for you. As for Lily, she wore a cheap rented dress and a plastic prop ring just to get through the ceremony. When you didn't show up, she posted the wedding video on TikTok, hoping you'd see it and come home. The live chat flooded the screen again. Oh my god, I remember that TikTok. People were mocking her in the comments because her dress looked so cheap and the ring was way too big. I was one of those trolls. I thought her husband didn't love her. I feel sick. I'm so sorry. This is heartbreaking. Dr. Lily was a saint. Looking at the ring on the table, my mind drifted back to 3 years ago. Ethan had just proposed to me. I had just graduated with my master's degree and accepted a dream job offer. My mom's condition was stabilizing, and she was about to be discharged. I was so happy, so full of hope for the future. I had called Lily immediately. Lily, Ethan proposed. You have to be my maid of honor. I want you to be there to watch me walk down the aisle. Lily had laughed and agreed over the phone. The moment I hung up, the first thing I searched for wasn't my wedding dress, but her maid of honor gown. If only I hadn't seen what I saw. If only I hadn't walked into that room. The ring that was supposed to be on my finger had been replaced by cold, heavy handcuffs. The man who once held me and whispered that I was his entire world was now standing on the opposite side of the glass. He was demanding that I reveal the location of the monster who destroyed everything. Chloe, if you have even a shred of humanity left, tell me where Lily is. I closed my eyes tightly, a single tear slipping down my cheek. The cemetery columbarium. Section A, row 3 niche 2. What you're looking for is right there. The police moved fast, cordoning off the cemetery within minutes. But when they forced the locker open, there were no ashes. Only a thin, lightweight manila envelope. Ethan slammed the envelope in front of me. Chloe, are you playing games with us to buy time? The deputy captain urged him. Captain, let me take over the interrogation. Dr. Lily might still be alive. You and the team need to go search the area. Every second we waste here could cost her her life. As Ethan hesitated, I tilted my chin toward the envelope. Did you actually look at the files inside? Ethan pulled on his gloves and ripped the envelope open. Inside was a signed organ donor consent form. The edges of the paper were stained with dried, dark red blood, but nothing was more painful to look at than my mother's shaky signature at the bottom. Ethan frowned. What is this supposed to mean, Chloe? Do you think your mother was forced to sign this by Lily? I was there. It wasn't like that at all. Lily didn't even bring the paper. A nurse on duty mentioned the organ shortage program, and your mother volunteered to sign it herself. I finally lost my composure. I screamed, my voice cracking. Volunteered. Ethan, did you throw your 5 years of detective training into the trash? For the first time, the live chat started to turn. Wait. Is it possible the doctor manipulated the mom into signing the donor card, and then let her die on purpose? This is giving me chills. If that's true, I totally understand why Chloe went on a killing spree. Who wouldn't? She killed 4 other people, right? Weren't those victims all connected to the hospital's transplant unit? Oh my god, we are getting close to the truth. I'm crying for Chloe. Her best friend murdered her mother for profit, her detective boyfriend married the killer, and now he's interrogating her. This is sick. Ethan noticed the shift in the comments. His face turned incredibly ugly. Just as he was about to argue, the interrogation room door was kicked open. Captain, we have a major lead. Chloe Miller has been operating in South America for the past 3 years. According to international intelligence, she is a key player in an underground human organ trafficking ring. The announcement hit the room like a bomb. Ethan stared at me, his jaw clenching so hard I thought his teeth would shatter. Chloe, your acting is superb. I almost fell for it. You were the one who brainwashed your mother into signing that form, weren't you? You traffic organs. And to frame Lily, you didn't even spare your own mother. Are you even human? The live chat went wild. What the hell? Chloe is the boss of an organ ring. So she forced her mom to sign, let her die, framed the doctors, and then murdered everyone who knew the truth to silence them. Holy shit. This is the plot twist of the century. She is a literal demon. Looking at the comments, I laughed so hard that tears of blood felt like they were streaming down my face. Ethan could barely stand straight. Chloe, do you have anything to say for yourself? I wiped my eyes with my sleeve. What's left to explain? You've already written my sentence. The deputy captain stood up. Take her back to the holding cell. All units mobilize. Find Dr. Lily. Ethan didn't move. As the guards dragged me past him, he reached out his hand, hesitating. But in the end he said nothing. After 48 hours of intense search, the police found what was left of Lily Harrison. She was buried in the plot right next to my mother's grave. Her body was twisted and broken, all her limbs and her spine snapped and shattered. When the forensics team laid her out, they realized she had been buried alive, forced into a desperate kneeling posture of penance and begging. The deputy captain's eyes turned red. Chloe is a monster. Ethan fainted on the spot. The medical examiner's report concluded. Every single one of the victim's viable organs had been surgically harvested. I hadn't lied when I said I didn't know where she was. Because every piece of Lily Harrison was in a different zip code. When the trial began, Ethan sat in the gallery dressed in black. He sat among the weeping families of the other victims. I kept my eyes down as the prosecutor read the charges. The defendant, Chloe Miller, did willfully and with premeditation commit 5 counts of first-degree murder, resulting in immediate death. Furthermore, the defendant has been linked to over 480 counts of international organ trafficking over the past 3 years, causing catastrophic societal harm. Defendant, you may now present your defense. I remained silent. The gallery erupted into furious screams. What defense? She's a parasite. My son studied for 12 years to become a surgeon. She slaughtered him and tried to ruin his reputation by calling him a smuggler. She killed 5 doctors. Hang her. Give her the chair. They held up framed photos of the deceased, their faces twisted in grief. Dozens of camera flashes blinded me. I opened my mouth, but my throat felt like it was clogged with rusted iron. It was my old trauma. Whenever my emotions peaked, my selective mutism would paralyze my vocal cords. Lily knew this. Ethan knew this too. That was why, when we were kids, Lily always had to speak up for me when I was bullied. I looked toward Ethan in the crowd. But he was swallowed by the angry mob. Suddenly, raw eggs and small rocks flew over the security barrier, pelted against my forehead. Blood trickled down into my eyes, turning my vision a blurry scarlet. I could only look at the judge and shake my head. When the judge handed down the verdict, death by lethal injection, the courtroom erupted into cheers. The families sobbed and hugged one another. The judge asked one last time, "Defendant, do you understand your right to appeal?" I still couldn't speak. I nodded, then shook my head. The gavel slammed down. It was over. I closed my eyes. Lily, you won. As the guards led Chloe away, Ethan instinctively took a step forward. But he was instantly swamped by the cheering families dragging him out of the courtroom. Reporters shoved microphones into his face the second he stepped outside. "Captain Carter, you caught the monster who killed your wife. How do you feel about the death penalty verdict? We heard the killer was your college sweetheart. How do you process such a betrayal?" Ethan felt a suffocating pressure in his chest. He couldn't squeeze out a single word. Suddenly, a memory flashed in his mind. 3 years ago, when Chloe supposedly stabbed Lily. She hadn't said a single word in her defense then either. The more desperate Chloe was to explain, the more silent she became. Ethan's face went pale. "Back to the precinct," he yelled, turning to the deputy. "Pull the evidence from 3 years ago. The knife Chloe used to stab Lily, and Lily's original medical report." Now, the deputy was confused, but seeing the sheer panic in Ethan's eyes, he didn't dare hesitate. When the medical files were delivered, Ethan read every single syllable. When he finished, his eyes were bloodshot. He screamed, "File an emergency stay of execution. Chloe's case is a setup." The basement archives of the central precinct smelled of damp concrete, old cardboard, and the vinegar tang of decaying microfilm. Ethan Carter stood under a single, buzzing fluorescent tube, his fingers trembling as he tore open the dusty plastic evidence bag from 3 years ago. Inside lay the weapon, a standard 7-inch kitchen knife with a faded wooden handle. He laid it on the clean white paper of his desk and pulled a high-intensity magnifying lamp over it. The original report, signed by a rookie technician who had since retired, was brief. It stated that Chloe's fingerprints were found on the handle, and Lily's blood was on the blade. Case closed. It had been an open and shut case of domestic assault, resolved quickly when Lily signed the waiver to drop all criminal charges. But Ethan was no longer a rookie. He was a captain of detectives, trained to see the microscopic friction ridges of human deceit. Under the cold, blue light of the magnifier, the finger strips on the hilt of the knife were strangely perfect. There was no smudging, no lateral slide marks that would indicate a struggle or a violent, swinging motion. The prints were stamped flat onto the wood, as if someone had taken a paralyzed or unconscious hand and pressed it directly onto the handle. Even more damning was the guard of the knife. There was a faint, partial print on the steel collar where the blade met the handle. It was small, delicate, and printed in a reverse grip pattern, an index finger wrapping around the metal to stabilize a self-inflicted plunge. It was Lily's print. Ethan's breath hitched in his throat. He felt a cold, oily sweat break out across his neck. He pulled the medical file of Lily's stab wound. The emergency surgeon on duty that night had been Dr. Harrison, Lily's father, who had also been the chief of surgery at Lincoln General before his retirement. The diagram of the wound was precise. It was a single clean incision in the left lower quadrant of the abdomen, exactly 1.8 centimeters deep. It had bypassed the rectus abdominis muscle entirely, sliding neatly through the subcutaneous fat and stopping just short of the peritoneum. For an amateur swinging a knife in a blind, jealous rage, the strike was impossible. It was the entry wound of a surgical scalpel, calculated to cause moderate bleeding and maximum drama without touching a single blood vessel or nerve ending. She did it to herself, Ethan whispered, the words sounding hollow and foreign. In the empty archive room, she framed her. With a shaking hand, he pulled the second file, the one he had avoided looking at for 3 years out of sheer, suffocating guilt. The medical records of Sarah Miller, Chloe's mother. The official cause of death was listed as refractory cardiac arrest following multi-organ failure. But Ethan didn't look at the summary page. He went straight to the internal hospital server logs, the raw, unedited data that the digital systems recorded automatically every second. He looked at the timeline of the night Sarah Miller died. 21:14. Patient's EEG shows flatline activity. 21:18. Organ procurement team, led by Dr. Harrison, enters operating room for 21:30. Double kidney and liver. Retrieval completed. But when Ethan scrolled down to the auxiliary machine logs, the independent monitoring systems for the anesthesia gas and the arterial line monitors, his heart stopped. The arterial pressure monitor, which recorded the patient's actual blood pressure through a wrist catheter, had continued to spike and plunge in rhythmic waves until 21:26. A dead body does not have arterial pressure waves. The EEG flatline had been manually entered into the system by a technician using a override code. The machine itself had continued to register low-frequency, deep brain activity, the agonizing, hypoxic struggle of a brain still receiving oxygen, while the surgical team was opening her chest. They hadn't waited for her to die. They had harvested her while she was still alive, using the signed consent form as a legal shield to turn a state-sanctioned murder into a charitable donation. Captain? The door to the archive room creaked open. The deputy captain stood in the doorway, his face pale under the dim light. We just got the notice from the State Department of Corrections. The governor's office has received the file, but they're refusing to issue the stay. Ethan spun around, his eyes wild. What do you mean they're refusing? The evidence is right here. The mother was alive during the retrieval. The assault 3 years ago was staged. It doesn't matter, Ethan, the deputy said, his voice dropping to a low, heavy whisper. The public livestream of her arrest had 40 million viewers. The DA's office just built their entire platform for the upcoming judicial election on this conviction. If we stand up now and tell the world that the police department star captain married a black market murderer, and that the 4 Saint doctors of Lincoln General were butchering patients for their kidneys, the entire county administration will collapse. He stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind him. The chief wants you to drop it, Ethan. He says if you push this, they won't just deny the stay. They'll ruin you. They'll release the internal affairs file from 3 years ago and frame you as her accomplice. The maximum security wing of the women's penitentiary was designed to minimize the sound of human existence. The walls were covered in thick, gray acoustic tiles that absorbed the clanking of metal doors and the occasional, muffled screams from the isolation cells down the corridor. Chloe sat on the low concrete bench of her cell, her back pressed against the cold brick wall. Her right leg, still bandaged where the sniper's bullet had torn through her calf, was propped up on a rolled-up blanket. The pain had subsided into a dull, rhythmic throb that she welcomed. It was a physical anchor in a world that had become entirely spectral. She looked at her hands. The skin on her wrists was raw and purple from the heavy steel transport cuffs, but they were clean. For 3 years, she had lived in the dirt of foreign cities, her fingers constantly stained with the grease of diesel engines and the cheap disinfectant of underground clinics. Now she was clean. Her work was done. The 5 names she had written on the small slip of paper she kept in her shoe were all gone. Dr. Harrison, Lily's father, Dr. Vance, the transplant coordinator, Dr. Kelly, the technician who falsified the EEG, Dr. Chen, the surgeon who accepted the liver, and Lily. The system called her a serial killer. The media called her the organ queen of the South American black market. But to Chloe, she was simply an accountant, closing a ledger that the state had refused to open. A guard tapped a heavy wooden baton against the steel bars of her cell. Miller, you've got a visitor. Legal counsel. Chloe didn't move. I didn't request counsel. Her voice was low, raspy, and dry from days of silence. The selective mutism that had paralyzed her during the trial was gone now, replaced by a quiet, dead indifference. Doesn't matter, the guard said, unlocking the gate with a heavy metallic clatter. He's got a special order from the state federal court. Move it. The visitation room was small, divided by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass. On the other side sat Ethan. He had taken off his dress uniform. He wore a rumpled gray suit jacket, his collar open, his tie gone. He looked like a man who had spent 3 days sleeping in his car, his face hollow, his jaw covered in a thick stubble of dark hair, his eyes bloodshot and watery. He looked up when she entered, his shoulders sagging with a sudden heavy breath. Chloe sat down slowly, her injured legs stiff. She did not pick up the black plastic receiver hanging on the wall. She simply looked through the scratched plastic at the man she had once planned to spend her life with. Ethan grabbed his receiver, his hand shaking so violently he nearly dropped it. He pressed it to his ear and tapped on the glass with his key until Chloe slowly reached out and lifted her own phone. "Chloe," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I know." She didn't answer. Her face remained as still as stone. "I found the server logs from the night your mother died," Ethan said, his tears finally spilling over his dark eyelashes, leaving wet tracks through the dust on his cheeks. The EEG, it was fake. She was alive when they opened her. And the knife from 3 years ago. Lily did it to herself. She used her father's scalpel technique to make it look like a stab wound. He pressed his forehead against the cold plexiglass, his shoulders heaving. "Why didn't you tell me, Chloe? Why did you run? If you had just told me." "I did tell you," Chloe said. Her voice through the low-quality receiver was clear, cold, and entirely devoid of emotion. 3 years ago, when I came to your apartment with the medical logs I stole from Harrison's office, you didn't even look at them. You saw the bandage on Lily's stomach and you put me in handcuffs. You told me I was sick. You told me I was jealous because Lily was a doctor and I was just a schoolteacher. I was stupid." Ethan sobbed, his hand slamming against the glass. "I was blind. I thought I was protecting you from going to prison. Lily said if I married her, she would never press charges against you. She said she wanted to protect our family's reputation." "No," Chloe said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "She wanted to keep you close so you would never look at the files. She knew that as long as you were the son-in-law of the chief of surgery, you would never investigate the donor program." She leaned forward, her face inches from the plastic barrier. "You wanted to be the hero, Ethan. You wanted to be the youngest captain in the state. And Lily gave you the perfect story, the tragic, supportive wife who sacrificed her body to save your mother-in-law, while your crazy ex-girlfriend ran off into the dark." "I'm going to stop it," Ethan said, his voice turning desperate, urgent. "Eve sent the raw files to the federal prosecutor in the next district. They're launching a civil rights investigation into the hospital. I've filed an appeal with the federal circuit court. They have to stay the execution, Chloe. They have to." Chloe looked at him for a long, quiet minute. For the first time, a small, sad smile touched the corners of her lips. "The federal court won't stay it, Ethan," she said softly. "The governor has already signed the warrant. The execution is scheduled for Thursday morning at 5. No, they can't." "They can," she said. "The system doesn't care about the truth, Ethan. It only cares about the process. And the process says that I am a convicted killer who slaughtered 5 citizens. The state needs a body to close the case. And they're going to take mine." She hung up the receiver. She stood up, ignoring his desperate shouting and his fists pounding on the glass, and walked back into the dark corridor of the silent row. On Tuesday morning, the office of District Attorney Marcus Vance was bright, smelling of lemon polish and expensive coffee. Ethan sat across from him, his hands flat on the mahogany desk. Between them lay a blue folder containing the certified server logs from Lincoln General. "This is murder, Marcus," Ethan said, his voice dangerously low. "The hospital was operating a systematic harvesting ring. They target poor, uninsured patients who have no families to ask questions. Sarah Miller was just one of dozens." Vance didn't look at the folder. He was busy adjusting his gold cufflinks. "Captain Carter," Vance said, his voice smooth and practiced. "You've had a very difficult year. You lost your wife in a brutal, horrific manner. It's completely understandable that you are suffering from a post-traumatic episode. Don't play your political games with me." Ethan roared, slamming his fist onto the desk. The EEG monitor was manipulated. The technician, Kelly, admitted it in his personal diary before Chloe killed him. "The evidence is right there." "The evidence," Vance said, his eyes turning cold and hard as flint, "is a set of unverified digital logs from a server that was decommissioned 6 months ago. Even if they are real, they do not justify 5 counts of premeditated murder." He leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. Chloe Miller did not go to the police, Ethan. She did not file a lawsuit. She went to South America, joined a cartel-linked smuggling group, and spent 3 years hunting down respected members of our medical community like animals. Because your office wouldn't have investigated them. Ethan shouted. Harrison was your biggest campaign donor. That is slander, Captain, Vance said calmly. And if you repeat it outside this room, I will have you suspended before you reach the elevator. He stood up, walking to the large window that overlooked the city square. Below, a small group of protesters was already gathering, holding signs that read, Justice for Dr. Lily and death to the Organ Queen. The public wants closure, Ethan, Vance said, looking down at the crowd. The city needs to know that the monsters who disrupt our peace are punished swiftly. The governor's signature is on the warrant. The execution will proceed on Thursday morning. You're going to kill an innocent woman, Ethan said, his voice shaking. Innocent? Vance let out a soft, dry chuckle. She admitted to killing Lily, didn't she? She told you where the body was. She took her organs, Ethan. He left her best friend's body in a shallow grave, hollowed out like a pumpkin. Because that's what they did to her mother. Ethan screamed, his face turning red. She wanted Lily to feel what her mother felt. She wanted them all to. No. Then she is a vigilante, Vance said, turning around to face him. And the state does not tolerate vigilantes. We are the only ones allowed to take a life. In the name of justice. If we let her live, we admit that our system is broken. And we cannot afford to do that. He tapped the blue folder on his desk. Take your leave, Captain. Go home. Grieve your wife. And let the law do its job. Ethan did not go home. He drove to the independent offices of the State Tribune, a small investigative newspaper that operated out of a converted warehouse near the docks. The editor-in-chief, a sharp-tongued woman named Clara Vance, no relation to the DA, looked at the server logs and the old forensics reports for 3 hours. Without speaking. It's a masterpiece of a cover-up, Clara said, leaning back in her chair and lighting a cigarette. Harrison was a genius. He didn't just harvest organs, he created a network of local judges, DA investigators, and hospital administrators, who all benefited from the high success rates of the transplant unit. The hospital received millions in federal grants because their survival metrics were the highest in the country. Can you print it? Ethan asked, his voice cracking with exhaustion. I can print it, Clara said. But it won't stop the needle, Ethan. The Tribune is a weekly paper. By the time our print run hits the stands on Friday morning, Chloe Miller will already have been dead for 24 hours. We can put it online, Ethan urged. A digital release. Now. Tonight. Clara shook her head slowly. The servers of our paper are hosted by a local provider owned by a subsidiary of the hospital's parent company. The moment I hit publish on a story accusing the chief of surgery of murder, our site will go dark. They'll file an injunction for defamation before the first page loads. She looked at Ethan's desperate, hollow face with a touch of genuine pity. You're trying to fight a machine with paper, Captain. The machine has teeth. It has layers of steel and concrete designed specifically to keep people like you from turning the gears back. Then what do I do? Ethan whispered, his hands covering his face. I can't just watch her die. Go back to the prison, Clara said gently. Use your badge to get into the observation room. Be there with her. Sometimes, the only thing we can do for the people we've failed is to make sure they don't have to look at their executioners alone. Thursday, 4:45 a.m. The execution chamber of the state penitentiary was remarkably clean. It looked like a modern high-tech clinic, save for the thick triple-pane glass window that separated the sterile room from the viewing gallery. The walls were painted a soft, neutral beige. The gurney in the center of the room was padded with dark blue vinyl, with wide leather straps designed to secure the arms and legs of the condemned. Chloe lay on the gurney, her face turned toward the ceiling. She had refused the traditional last meal. She had refused to see the prison chaplain. She had spent the last 12 hours in absolute silence, her mind drifting back to the summer afternoons she had spent with her mother in their small garden before the sickness had taken hold. The technician, a quiet man in medical scrubs, was carefully inserting the 4 catheters into the veins of her arms. You're going to feel a cold sensation in a moment, Chloe, he said, his voice low and clinical. That's just the saline flush. Keep your arms still. Chloe didn't look at him. She looked through the thick glass window into the darkened viewing gallery. The gallery was mostly empty. The families of the deceased doctors had refused to attend, stating through their lawyers that they did not want to dignify the monsters and with their presence. But in the front row, his face pressed against the glass, sat Ethan. He was wearing his captain's uniform again, not because he cared about the badge, but because it was the only way the guards would let him into the restricted viewing area. His hands were flat against the glass, matching the exact position of her hand. On the gurney armrest, the phone on the wall of the execution chamber rang once. The warden picked it up, listened for a few seconds, and then hung up. He looked at the technician and gave a slight, brief nod. There would be no stay. No phone call from the governor. The machinery of the state had run its course smooth, efficient, and entirely blind to the rot at its core. The technician reached for the three-way valve of the 4 lines. "We are beginning the procedure," the warden announced into the microphone. The first drug, sodium thiopental, began to flow through the clear plastic tube into Chloe's arm. It was a heavy, numbing cold that crept up her shoulder, turning her chest into a block of ice. Her vision began to blur around the edges, the bright, fluorescent lights of the ceiling spinning into a slow, white vortex. She looked at Ethan one last time. In the dim light of the gallery, she could see him crying. He was mouthing words through the thick glass, words she couldn't hear, but which she knew anyway. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Chloe let out a long, quiet breath. The tension that had held her shoulders tight for 3 years finally dissolved, leaving nothing but a vast silent weightlessness. She didn't hate him anymore. She didn't hate Lily. She didn't hate the doctors who had stolen her mother's breath. They were all just parts of the same broken world, a world that she was finally, beautifully leaving behind. Her eyes slowly closed. The heart monitor beside her gurney began to beep in a slow, descending rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. And then, a long, flat, unbroken tone that filled the sterile room with a clean, clinical finality. Friday 6 a.m. The morning after the execution, the city woke to a different kind of storm. The State Tribune's website had gone dark, as Clara Vance had predicted. But she hadn't just relied on her own servers. At exactly 5:05 a.m., the moment the flatline was recorded in the prison log, a massive, decentralized data dump was released on every major international social media platform, hosted on secure servers in Switzerland and Iceland. The files contain the raw EEG data of Sarah Miller, the forensic analysis of Lily's staged stab wound, the personal journals of Dr. Kelly, and a complete, certified list of over 40 poor, uninsured patients whose accidental deaths at Lincoln General had resulted in immediate, highly profitable organ harvests. By noon, the state capitol was surrounded by thousands of angry citizens. The federal prosecutor's office bypasses the local DA, launching an immediate, armed raid on the Lincoln General Administration building. Dr. Harrison, Lily's father, was arrested at his luxury home in the suburbs, dragged out in handcuffs. In front of dozens of news cameras. District Attorney Marcus Vance resigned by 3 in the afternoon, his political career destroyed by the proof that his office had actively suppressed the evidence to secure an election year conviction. Ethan Carter stood on the steps of the municipal building, his badge and his service weapon sitting in a neat pile on the concrete behind him. A reporter shoved a microphone into his face. "Captain Carter, the federal reports show that your wife, Lily Harrison, was a key participant in the harvesting scheme. How do you react to the news that Chloe Miller was telling the truth the entire time?" Ethan looked at the camera lens, at the millions of faces watching him through their screens, the same faces that had cheered for Chloe's death just 48 hours ago. "The truth doesn't matter to you," Ethan said, his voice flat, dry, and entirely dead. "You wanted a show, and we gave you one." He turned and walked down the steps, leaving the badge, the uniform, and the city behind him. He drove 3 hours to the quiet country cemetery where Sarah Miller was buried. The grass was green, wet with the morning dew. Next to her grave was a fresh, unmarked mound of dark earth where the prison authority had buried Chloe's body, in a simple pine box, as she had requested in her final paperwork. Ethan sat down on the damp grass between the two graves. He pulled a small silver promise ring out of his pocket, the one he had bought for Chloe 4 years ago, before the world had broken into pieces. He laid it gently on the dark, wet soil of her grave. "I'm here, Chloe," he whispered, his head resting against the cold stone marker of her mother's headstone. "I'm finally here." The wind blew through the old oak trees of the cemetery, a soft, clean sound that carried no answers, no apologies, and no hope of return, only the quiet, indifferent peace of the earth.